Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an incredible historical saga that kicks off with a seemingly impossible prediction. Just put yourself in the 7th century for a second. You're part of this really small embattled community, totally surrounded by the world's absolute biggest superpowers. You've got the Persian Empire to the east and the Byzantine Empire to the north and west. And right in the middle of all that tension, a prediction is made about the fall of an impregnable empire. That's exactly where our story starts today. It's this wild blend of prophecy, a gripping centuries-long siege, and a legacy that literally still shapes our modern world.
Okay, let's look at the exact prophecy itself, made way back in 628 CE. The prophet Muhammad made this incredibly specific statement from Medina, saying, "Verily, you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will her conqueror be, and what a wonderful army will that army be." Now, what makes this so absolutely astonishing is the timing. It was made when the Muslim community was vastly outnumbered. I mean, they hadn't even reached the city. Yet here is this profound praise given to a man who wasn't even born yet, for an army that wasn't even formed, about a conquest that wouldn't actually happen for another 8 centuries. And to be clear, this wasn't some retrospective legend pieced together after the fact. Scholars meticulously authenticated this narration as a solid, reliable foundation, and historians fully expected it to be fulfilled long before it actually went down.
Which brings us to Section 1, the impossible prophecy.
So, just how impossible did this prophecy actually seem at the time? Well, consider the Theodosian walls. We're talking about a massive 7-kilometer triple-walled defensive system, complete with a moat and towers. This setup literally made the Byzantine capital impregnable for a millennium. Constantinople wasn't just your average city. Sitting right there on the Bosphorus Strait, it was the strategic lock between Europe and Asia. Surrounded by sea on 3 sides, no army in the ancient world had successfully breached these land walls in over 1,000 years. There was just no way through.
And that leads into Section 2, 8 centuries of failure. Because, this prophecy didn't just come true overnight. It sparked centuries of intense anticipation, massive military campaigns, and frankly devastating defeats. 800 years. For an astounding 8 centuries, the absolute greatest Muslim generals, leading massive armies, tried and catastrophically failed to breach those city walls. It was this grueling, multi-generational test of endurance. Pretty much every major power in the known world tried to take this city and failed. They threw absolutely everything they had at it. Leader after leader wanted to be the one to fulfill the promise, but those walls, they just refused to fall.
When you map out this massive gap in time, it really highlights those catastrophic military failures, along with a few strange anomalies. Back in 669 CE, we see the first Arab siege. This was a campaign where the esteemed companion Abu Ayyub al-Ansari actually lost his life, famously asking to be buried as close to the walls as possible. Then you've got the second Arab siege in 717 CE, which was just an absolute catastrophe. An immense force was totally devastated by disease, a brutal winter, and of course, Byzantine Greek fire. So for centuries, the failures just kept piling up. There was one really bizarre anomaly, the Crusader breach in 1204, but actually, that was achieved through internal betrayal and sea access, not by defeating those mighty land walls. So the 800-year wait dragged on.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Conquest of 1453.
Enter a totally new era and an Ottoman Sultan who was uniquely obsessed with fulfilling this exact prophecy right from his youth. Get this, he was 21. The bold conqueror taking on a 1,000-year-old fortress was only 21 years old. Sultan Muhammad II, or Fatih Sultan Mehdi, basically dedicated his entire youth to this single moment. He obsessively studied the geography, he collected maps, he even learned Greek just so he could read the Byzantine accounts directly. He prepared his whole life to face the legendary Theodosian walls. For him, it wasn't just about expanding an empire. He was absolutely consumed by the ambition to be that specific wonderful leader mentioned in that 7th century text.
Now, when the siege finally kicked off in the spring of 1453, the odds looked pretty stark. You had roughly 7,000 Byzantine defenders holding out against 80,000 Ottoman soldiers. But listen, while Mehmed clearly had overwhelming numbers, history had already proven time and time again that massive armies alone were never enough to take this heavily defended peninsula. Previous Arab and Ottoman commanders had brought huge forces before and still failed spectacularly. So Mehmed knew for sure that he needed unprecedented innovation, not just manpower.
And Mehmed pulled it off through pure, audacious military genius. It really boils down to 3 unprecedented steps over a 53-day siege.
Step 1. He hired a Hungarian engineer named Urban to construct the largest cannons ever built. These things were firing massive 500-kilogram stone balls to systematically crack the walls. Step 2, and honestly, this is the mind-blowing part. The Golden Horn Harbor was blocked by a giant iron chain, right? So, in a single night, Mehmed laid greased wooden rails and had 70 ships pulled entirely overland to bypass the chain completely. Just incredible. Finally, step 3. Following a relentless bombardment, his troops poured through a small, unlocked gate called the Kirkaporta, and just like that, Constantinople had fallen.
That takes us to Section 4, Hagia Sophia through time. So, with the city taken, the specific details of that 7th century prophecy align directly with historical reality. It was fulfilled point by point. You shall conquer Constantinople, undeniably achieved in May 1453. What a wonderful leader. Mehmed achieved this at just 21, and instead of sacking the city with unrestrained violence, his very first act was to enter and perform sujood or prostration in prayer. He protected the civilian population and governed justly, even granting authority to the Greek Orthodox Patriarch. And, what a wonderful army. Historical observers at the time actually noted that the Ottoman troops possessed exceptional discipline by medieval warfare standards, closely following strict orders against looting churches.
At the absolute center of this monumental shift stands one of the most famous, most beautiful structures in human history. The Hagia Sophia stands as the ultimate physical symbol of this entire saga, and its history perfectly mirrors the shifts in geopolitical and religious power. It was built way back in 537 CE by Emperor Justinian as the largest cathedral in the world. Then, in 1453, Mehmed stood beneath its massive floating dome and converted it into a mosque. Fast forward to 1934, and the Turkish Republic transformed it into a museum. And as you probably know, recently in 2020, it was reconverted into a mosque, which sparked really powerful emotions worldwide as Friday prayers resumed there after 86 years.
Let's move into Section 5, Future Prophecies and Meaning. Because, the story of Constantinople isn't just rooted in the past, it actually has a potential footprint in the future. Which leads us to a pretty fascinating question. Is a second conquest prophesied? There are these nuanced traditions suggesting the city might actually be conquered again in the end times. Now, some scholars urge caution regarding these narrations, while others are quick to point out that, hey, the first conquest seemed equally impossible 800 years before it occurred.
But there is a really profound difference between the historical military conquest and the debated, prophesied spiritual one. In 1453, the leader was Mehmed II, and the method was an agonizingly brilliant military siege. But the potential second conquest? That's placed in the era of the Imam Mahdi, and the method isn't cannons or dragging ships over land. It's takbir, the spiritual verbal proclamation of faith that actually causes the walls to fall. It outlines this really profound shift from a physical, gritty battle to a purely spiritual victory. Regardless of where you land on those future debates, there are 3 really grounded philosophical takeaways here for the modern believer facing intellectual uncertainty today. Number 1, have confidence in prophetic traditions. The exact fulfillment of the 1453 prophecy is just documented history. Number 2, practice patience with timelines. Remember, 25 entire generations of Muslims lived and died believing in that prophecy without ever seeing it happen. It was the 26th generation that finally did. And number 3, see the Hagia Sophia as a living symbol of continuity, something that directly connects believers today to a promise made in the 7th century.
Ultimately, this incredible 800-year saga asks you a direct question. What preparation are you making for the role you are meant to play? You don't have to be a 21-year-old sultan leading an empire. The wonderful army is made up of wonderful individuals, fulfilling their appointed roles. Whether that's raising a family, seeking knowledge, or just holding firm to the truth. Be the wonderful army in your sphere. And I'll leave you with this provocative thought. If a single sentence spoken in the desert could perfectly predict the fall of the ancient world's greatest fortress 8 centuries later, what else is waiting exactly at its appointed time?